A warm greeting to Law and Life. This is Shashank Mishra with eminent senior advocate of Supreme Court of India, Sood Markandeji. Today, our point of discussion is unfinished agenda of amelioration of Muslim women. On this topic, my first question is why did Salma Mahmood, founder president of Al Qaeda, have such a complicated name for her organization?
So this is exactly the question I put to her when I first met her and when she came to file writ petition to challenge the Muslim Women's Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986.
What did
So,
Salma? Yes, sir.
yeah,
So why did
yeah.
the Salma Mahmood struggle against?
Oh yes, she struggled against first of all Burkha, then discrimination against Muslim women in all civil matters, that is, marriage, divorce, maintenance, succession, guardianship, custody of children, etc., etc. Then what she called fictitious meher, which I'll explain when we come to that. And then the purpose for which she had come to Delhi, that is to challenge the Muslim women's protection of rights to rights on Divorce Act, which was passed in the aftermath of Shahbanu case.
So looking at the constraints you have told of your format, let us be brief and discuss each item of our agenda one by one. The first one is the burqa.
I'll be brief. As you said, there are constraints of our format. So Burkha, more popularly called Gosha in Hyderabad, was on the top was on the top of her agenda and perhaps the most contentious one. Probably it was due to strong influence of her father that Salma Mahmood took up this uh, with more fervor than for any other uh, item on the agenda. Uh, Actually, her father was a great admirer of Mustafa Kemal Pasha, who abolished the caliphate in Turkey and established the Turkish Republic. Let us see this in historical context. In early 1910s, the Russians had abolished the uh, Tsar's rule. The Chinese had abolished, the Chinese Empire. Dr. Sun Yat-sen set up the first Chinese Republic. And in the same way, Mustafa Kemal Pasha, he abolished the, the caliphate and established the Turkish Republic. So it was the demand of those times. See, as an act of gratitude to Turkish women who had contributed a great deal to the war efforts undertaken by Mustafa Kemal Pasha, they stitched, tens of thousands of army uniforms from their homes. So, as an act of gratitude to them, Kamal Pasha liberated them from wearing the veil. This is how the story goes. Salma Mahmood was also much influenced by a Moroccan feminist scholar, Marcini, who wrote a book denouncing the veil as being contrary to the teachings of the Prophet. It was also the subject matter of her letter to the Prime Minister and all chief ministers to provide police protection to her followers when they would hold peaceful demonstrations in the city square of every state capital called Mujahira Burkha Pash. This is, in tune with a lot of same uh, same kind of uh, I would say parallel, you know, uh, uh, a movement exists in Iran. Burkha is very, very unpopular in Iran. So this was also, they are trying to express their anger, which about an item which they believe is the symbol of their slavery or whatever, and their backwardness. So her goal still remains a distant dream.
Yes, sir, yes, sir. So on that, the second item on her agenda was complete partiality with other women professing different religion in all matrimonial matters.
So this is some kind of mini uniform civil code, I would say, as I told her. So I think the Constitution bench judgments of the Supreme Court in Shah Banu's case and Triple Talaq case have fully borne out the validity of her demands. These cases have been great landmarks towards the amelioration of the conditions of Muslim women in India, whom Salma Mahmood had described as the most oppressed section of the Indian society. But the gains of Shah Banu case were lost due to enactment of a very retrograde kind of legislation by Parliament, which she came to challenge. That is the Muslim Women's Protection of Rights on Divorce Act. She described that act as fraud on the constitution. Till Triple Talaq Act was passed, all successive central governments were oblivious to the rights of Muslim women. The central government of that time had ignored the sober and sane advice of Professor Tahir Mahmood and other progressive leaders of the Muslim community for reform in the marital laws of Muslims in India. Quite often, other lesser authorities also adopted, what I may call hands-off attitude, and sometimes did not know or care to find out the history of retrograde legislation like Sharia Act 1937. Uh, I think we should have a longer conversation exclusively devoted to this subject.
Sure, sure. In the further videos, we will discuss on that subject matter. But for now, the third word contentious of you have discussed earlier. What is fictitious meher?
As you know, Meher is to be mentioned in every Nikah Nama, that is the Muslim marriage certificate. So, Meher is a compensatory amount which a Muslim woman gets for suffering the consequences of uh, the annulment of her marriage. Therefore, the amount of meher in other countries is always very high as well as prompt. It has to be prompt. It has to be prompt. These are, deterrents for frivolous salah in most Muslim countries outside the Indian subcontinent. Meher is always high and prompt. That is simultaneous with the divorce and not deferred indefinitely. In India, what has happened is that several malpractices have grown around meher. One is fictitious meher. That is to say, the Nikanama says that meher would be 3 red dinars or something like that, some expression like that. Now, it, that is to say, it is expressed in a currency not in vogue. Therefore, it becomes unenforceable. Such expression as red dinars or whatever, they render it unenforceable. Another malpractice is low and illusory amount, and yet another is deferred one and not the prompt one. All these malpractices cause a lot of hardship to Muslim women and are to their grave detriment.
So the last one of your contentious was the in is Muslim Women's Protection of Right on Divorce Act 1986.
Uh, Salma Mahmood undertook 3 or 4 trips to Delhi in connection with the preliminary and final hearings of her writ petition challenging the Muslim Women's Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986. But the constitutional validity of that law was upheld by a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court, and it was a great disappointment to Salman Mahmood. But as it is, it was that constitutional bench judgment upholding the constitutional validity of that law wasn't uh, uh, wasn't actually contrary to the interest of those women, because the entire law laid down in Shah Banu's case had been incorporated into this act, was read as starting that uh, Shah Banu's case law declared there has been incorporated into this judgment. So although it was a great disappointment to her, I think it was by and large satisfactory judgment. But perceptions differ. So
Yes, sir. And thank you for discussing, sir. And we will be discussing more on this such topics, sir.
yes, but we will have to have a longer discussion on such
Ye-
subject. As
Yes,
you
sir.
said, our format does not allow us to. On that note, I will conclude.